Welcome to the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I'm dedicated to helping you take control of your life. Together, we'll explore practical tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. Making small changes is possible and can lead to big results. Are you ready? Let's go do this. Small Steps, Big Wins family. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to shout out a big thank you to those who have left reviews for me. Today, I want to thank Kyle Wakeman, who left a 5-star review and writes, Sue does such an amazing job as a host. Asking great questions is a skill, and she has done a great job honing it. Thoroughly enjoyed listening and soaking up all the actionable advice and information. Kyle, a big thank you to you for your kind words. Well, Small Steps, Big Wins family, today you are in for a real treat. I interviewed Dr. Jason Balara. He's a veterinary surgeon, multifamily syndicator, and podcaster. Our interview touches on all of those areas, and if you were ever wondering about multifamily syndication and what it is, he does a great job demystifying this. He also hosts a podcast called Know Your Why, and we unpack what his why is and how you can find yours. So please remember to leave a 5-star review, and if you post a comment, I'll feature it on my website. So without further ado, enjoy my interview with Dr. Jason Balara. Welcome to the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Me too. Thank you for having me, Sue. I'm really excited.
Yeah, it would not be a good podcast if I didn't introduce you to my audience. This is Dr. Jason Balara, and Jason is the CEO and co-founder of Lark Capital Group that focuses on value-add multifamily deals. Jason's also a veterinary surgeon and has utilized intense focus to hone in on his practice over the last 12 years. His goal is to allow passive investors, mainly those who come from the medical field like himself, to grow their wealth by making smart investments in multifamily properties. And Jason also finds time to be host of the Know Your Why podcast, which I can't wait to talk about too, because that's a really cool title for a podcast. So, jump right in there with a little bit more about who you are and where you were and where you are today.
Sure. Thank you for that intro. Those intros, those bios always sound so, I don't know. they sound so fabricated when you read them out loud. I'm like, I guess it's all true. But yeah, it's kind of a funny way to think about your life summed up into such a short
This
paragraph
is
form.
true. I use it though, just to give you some credibility and to actually honor all the accomplishments of my guests. So it's always nice to have those in there so that people know who they're listening to. And yes, that one did sound a little fabricated because I read it, but hey, it's all good.
It's fabricated. I wrote it, so it's not the reading that sounds weird. It's just like thinking.
Oh, okay. I thought the reading sounded weird.
No,
That was my evaluation.
It was great. So yeah, I mean, you really did sort of hit the highlights. I'm a veterinary surgeon, have been for coming up on 20 years now, but I started in real estate honestly as a teenager. I started in construction as a teenager. I used construction and real estate to kind of work my way through college, through vet school. Even afterwards, when I was training to be a surgeon, I used my knowledge in that space to mostly work on my own homes, but work on other people's homes and sort of generate some level of income while I was going to school for forever, because it takes a lot of schooling and additional training to become a surgeon. So they really ran in parallel. And after I finished my residency training and was a boarded surgeon, I got away from being, sort of feeling like I was really investing other than just kind of in our own houses. We bought, my wife might say she doesn't like this, but I'll never buy a house that's already fixed up, that's already, kind of had someone else's hands in it. I will either buy one that I can fix up or I will build from scratch. So that's been kind of the model that we've done for years now. And I've been doing it for, like I said, I bought my first house when I was 20. So it's been my beginning in real estate. And then in 2020, beginning of 2020, we actually had basically finished our own house renovation that we're in right now. I had some money saved up from work, and I just essentially, for some reason, got the itch. Maybe I was just bored because we were done with our house, but I got the itch to start just getting more serious into real estate investing beyond just our own house, or helping friends out with their houses, that kind of thing. And so I started, as a lot of people do, reading books, listening to podcasts, doing all of that sort of educational material. And that's when I was actually introduced to multifamily syndication. So I can say I didn't know what syndication was in regards to apartment complexes. I didn't know that concept 4 years ago. So I've spent the last 4 years really, sort of diving in, learning everything I possibly could about that. And the reason it appealed to me, two things. One was the scalability of it. So I actually originally thought, I live in Los Angeles, so buying sort of single family residences and having those cash flow is extremely difficult. People have figured out ways to do it. You can put ADUs on. I mean, there are ways to do it, but it's a challenging market to do that in. And I also knew that if I decided to flip houses, I would end up sort of spending all my time doing that, and away from my family. So I started looking at long distance investing, and originally I thought of that in regards to single family BRRRR strategy. But then when I came across syndication, it really just made more sense in terms of the scalability. I thought about, okay, how long would it take me to buy 100 single family houses versus how long will it take me to buy 100 unit apartment complex? And it's it takes longer to buy an apartment complex than it does a single family residence, but it doesn't take as long as it would take to buy 100 of those. So it was, the scalability, it made sense to me also because I do tend to, or have in the past, been very much a DIY person. And so when you're looking at multifamily and that level of scale, you've really got to start to think about this from a team standpoint, and sort of your property management, your partners, all of that. There's a lot that goes into it. So it was, in a way, I thought it would keep me more passive. I was wrong about that part. It has not kept me passive, but it but I did think that was part of the reason. I thought, okay, well, we have, but when you're asset managing, you tend to be very, very active. So but it is still, from a distance, I invest in Atlanta mostly, and I live in Los Angeles. So it does at least keep me from being there and swinging the hammer. I can be home and around my family and do, phone calls, emails, Zoom calls, things like this to kind of keep on top of it. But I can't take my kids into the OR. I can't have them sit with me while I'm doing surgery. So there's some freedom, despite the fact that it's not as passive as I anticipated.
You bring up a good point. Well, first of all, that thank you for sharing all of that because I don't think I have yet heard as such a concise reason why somebody would go into multifamily, and the part of buying 100 houses versus buying a multifamily that has 100 doors, and the scalability of multifamily syndication makes sense, especially if you don't have a long time horizon. So multifamily syndication does make sense. And the other thing too that I just want to point out, especially to those who are listening, that you picked a lane and you stuck with it. You didn't jump around from one place to the other. You took your expertise and you took your knowledge and you brought it into multifamily syndication, and then you just went in that direction. You studied it, you looked at it, you went that way, and you didn't zigzag around. And I just wanted to, pull that out. And I also appreciated the non-passive piece. Like, because everyone says, "Oh, I'm going to buy this duplex, triplex. I'm going to get a bunch of single families, and it's going to be passive income." You want to talk a little bit about how that's really not passive and what that means to you?
Yeah. No, it's a great point, and I think it's funny because we, as syndicators, one of the big parts of that, one of the components is raising capital, and so you're talking to other people that have interest in real estate investing. But the good and bad thing about real estate investing is that's like an incredibly large category, right? There's so many things that fit under the umbrella of real estate investing. It's kind of, I'll use a medical analogy because I, I'm in medicine, but it's when we talk to clients, they will say that they're, they might find out that their dog has, even a human, this human message, find out that they have cancer, right? There are so many different types. Some are very, very bad. Some are fairly manageable and easy to treat. And so real estate, similar, when you say real estate investing, there's just a million different things that follow under that umbrella. And so the reason I make that point is as someone who's going to invest in real estate, you really do need to kind of decide what your focus will be, or you will be jumping all over the place like you mentioned before.
Yeah.
So that's probably not exactly answering the question. What most surprised me, that was a little bit of it, is I didn't know how diverse you could be within the real estate umbrella. But I think just in comparison of thinking, okay, syndication will be passive, I think if you want to do a good job of it, there's really there's three components in my mind to asset management. And I suppose if you want to just kind of let your property manager run and they're doing a good job, it can be fairly passive. But in challenging markets, or if you want to be involved or you're doing heavy value add, there are really three things you have to look at. You have to look at the construction management, and that's what I enjoy. So that's, to me, in my mind, I thought that's what I would be doing. It would be great. I like construction. I understand that this is easy, and that's true. However, the surprising parts of it, there's also a huge component of it is financial management, right? So how does your construction budget play into the rents, the income that's coming into the property, and the expenses? How does that all balance together, and who's taking care of that, right? Someone, because it might be under the umbrella of your property management, but you still need to know what's going on, so you don't lose track of that. And then the third part of it is the resident side of it, the leasing, the kind of, and so you break it down in those three ways. Like I said, I thought construction management, piece of cake. I know how to do that. I've been doing it my whole life. I thought leasing, that's what the property manager is for. They'll be great. That'll be fine. I think the biggest surprise of it is how much of an accountant and bookkeeper I've had to be.
Mm.
I didn't really anticipate that. And people certainly hire that out. That's okay. You can hire that out, but even if you're hiring it out, you need to be able to
Right.
read those financials. You need to be able to understand, kind of where that money is going. How can we do better? How can we,
Right.
cut expenses? How can we increase income? You need to be on top of the trades, make sure that, your units aren't down a long time. So it all ties together. But that, to me, those are the three main pieces of asset management.
Mhm. And so you created Lark Capital. Talk about how that came about and a little bit about the formation, because that's not something that I think people realize, that when you go into multifamily syndication, you actually have to create a company. So, do you want to talk about how
Well,
that? Yeah.
yeah, that's actually a great question. And then I think there's actually a couple of different answers or components to that
Mhm.
question. So Lark Capital, and this is true with most real estate syndicators. Lark Capital is essentially the holding company, right? So we have Lark Capital is a partnership between myself and my business partner, who is also a very long time friend. He's a veterinarian as well, and to be honest, he's mainly kind of a silent capital partner. He we pooled our resources together to get Lark Capital started, and but I'm the managing partner. And Lark, this for me, this whole endeavor was always about family. I'm not a bird person. I'm not like a bird enthusiast. Lark is the initials of my children, my business partner, and my wife. So Logan, Ava, Reed, and Casey. And so that's like that's what it really means to me. I don't, like I said, I'm not, I think sometimes people think, oh, he must like birds, but it's really an acronym. And the formation of it, so you have to start with having an entity, you file it for an EIN, you essentially go through all the legal paperwork and the operating agreements and doing all of that. And then, a lot of times you start with a website, you start with business cards and things like that. Sometimes people get hung up on that stuff, and it'll slow them down from getting to the real work, in that they're trying to make a perfect website and perfect business
Mm.
card, perfect name and all of that. But realistically, that is just kind of like a placeholder. And then when you're syndicating, you're actually buying each of these assets under its own LLC. So now you say, okay, I'm going to go buy this, 100-unit apartment complex, and it's going to be owned by, 1235 Main Street Apartment LLC, right? It's going to be under its own entity. And so within that entity, now you have the general partners and the limited partners. And the general partners are going to be the operators of that deal. They're going to be the acquisitions person. They're going to be the capital raisers. They're going to get the debt in place, and they're going to asset manage it after the fact. The other side of that is the limited partners, or the investors. And the investors are essentially, their investment is purchasing them a number of shares in the company that owns that asset. And I think a lot of people probably don't, from outside this industry, don't understand how that all works.
Mhm.
But because I've had friends ask me this, when someone invests with me, they're not actually investing in Lark Capital. They're trusting Lark Capital. They're trusting me, but they are not, that investment is not in the Lark Capital holding company. That investment is in whatever deal or fund that we're working on at that time.
Mhm. Do you find new GPs, and well, obviously the LPs would be your investors. Sometimes you'll have repeat investors, sometimes you'll have new investors. I was on Lark Capital, and I think you guys have what, about a half a dozen or so different properties. I think it was. Do you get new GPs for each property, or do you find that you can recycle some of them?
You can definitely recycle them, and a lot of people do, and it's not a bad way to get started, in the sense that, again, going back to those separate entities, Lark Capital is me and my
Mhm.
business partner, my friend Reed. So that's not changing, right? That's kind of
Right.
staying static. Each of these property LLCs, you might partner with other people that, so another holding company and Lark Capital, or
Mm.
maybe it's just a person from Lark Capital and a person from another holding company. You have there's That was actually something that was maybe new to me, in the sense that, people talk about business partners. What I didn't realize is, I mean, you can have as many business partners as you want. You and I could go buy a property, and we would be business partners on that. We could, you can do it with kind of anybody. And what you want to be careful of is that you're partnering with people that you have a shared vision, common values, but complementary skill sets. So,
Mhm.
like, if a whole bunch of capital raisers partner together, but no one knows how to manage the asset, it's not going to be successful, and vice
Right.
versa, right? Like,
Makes
you need to
sense.
do these things. So I think it's just, you can certainly re-partner with people,
Mhm.
and sometimes people will do a handful of deals together, and then they might form an actual entity together, and that happens as well. So people talk about, like, it's like dating, and then if you're going to form that actual business together, then you're getting married, because because of the legal contracts that go along with it. Like real estate, there's a million different ways to have business partnerships.
Okay. Well, thank you for explaining that. I have a question. What are some of the unexpected surprises that came out of multifamily syndication and forming an LLC? What are some things that surprised you that you didn't expect?
I think one of the biggest ones is the level of accounting that I have been involved in. I didn't anticipate that, but I guess maybe I should have. Maybe in terms of, managing construction budgets and things like that. I think another, surprise is maybe that, and this just comes from, what my background is, but as veterinarians, there's not a lot of financial literacy. There's not a lot of, kind of, you don't go to business school while you're in vet school. It's not, they definitely don't you don't have time for that. And so what I have found surprising in large part, in largely because I'm so passionate now about, sort of these opportunities, the ability to increase people's wealth and set them up better for the future. I'm surprised at the number of people that maybe are not aware or are worried about it. I guess they just don't necessarily trust it. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised by it, because at one point I was the other side. I didn't know about it either. But when you're in real estate, I think people tend to get pretty passionate about it, and you're talking to other real estate investors and you're like, yes, this is amazing. Like, this really, like, I wish I knew this about this a lot longer ago. But then when I talk to people who are outside the space, I'm sometimes surprised at, kind of the reasons for not getting involved, I guess. And so
Yeah.
I think probably mainly it's fear. But I think that's on us. That's our job as real estate investors, to educate, raise awareness, that kind of thing, to help people know that these opportunities are there.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point about the lack of education and financial literacy that's out there is uh, amazing, like just astonishing that there are people wandering around that have no idea. And then when you get into real estate and then you realize the power of real estate, and that's not something that's taught out there. And you're right, to your point where you said those who are outside the real estate space just don't know the power of real estate and how it's our job to get that message out there and deliver it as much as we can, whether we do it in podcasts or, just talking to people. And that leads me right into your podcast. So you have a podcast called Know Your Why Podcast,
Yeah.
and you've got 224 episodes I saw already, or close to, or
Yeah.
maybe a few
Something like
more than
that.
that,
Right
something
around
like
there. Yeah.
that. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank
that,
you so
that is
much. Thank you so
that
much.
is quite an accomplishment. And I have a ton of questions off of that. The first is well, there's two actually. What made you decide to have a podcast and talk about Know Your Why? And how do you find time to do this? You are asset manager, you are, raising capital, you're a vet surgeon, you're a dad, and you've got a family. But yeah.
Yeah. How do you find time? An unanswerable question. But yeah. So I'll start with the podcast, and I should say that I wouldn't have a podcast if not for the encouragement and the help from some of the people I've met along the way in this journey. My podcast producer, Mark, that my the very first person to ask me to be on a podcast, Barry, and it just there are a couple of people that kind of encouraged me to do it. And I am sort of painfully introverted. You wouldn't know that, having that, since I have a podcast. But honestly, I was terrified, like really terrified, and it took me probably to over 100 episodes before I started to feel comfortable. And I still, I don't want to listen to myself. I don't want to, sort of watch my own watch my own face on camera. But I, at the very least, have in my life have been pretty good about realizing where my introverted nature, my shyness, was holding me back, and using that as an opportunity to sort of push myself outside the comfort zone, get comfortable being uncomfortable, as they say.
Mhm.
And also, I mean, honestly, doing a podcast feels safer in terms of networking than going to a giant conference full of people. So there's a couple of different reasons, but I mean, in a lot of ways, it just had to do with the people that were willing to encourage me to do it, all the guests that have been, I mean, like you said, 200 and something. And I don't think we've even had 10 repeat guests. So we have
Wow.
a lot of people that have been kind enough to give up their time and come on and share their story. And the reason it's called Know Your Why ties into kind of the second part of your question there. When I was going through that whole process of reading books, listening to podcasts, all of that in the beginning, it's a common question, right? It's a common question in other podcasts. Like, what is your why? You need to know what your why is to be able to sort of motivate yourself. And for me, that was the root of all of it. When I would listen to those podcasts, I cared about the guest's answer to that question, or maybe that question wasn't even asked directly, but I cared about their story as much as I cared about number of units, assets under management, like I didn't, not that I don't care about that. Like it's impressive when people have, sort of a lot of success in the space, but I think it's, to me, it was more important, like what was the meaning behind it. And so that's what always resonated with me. That's why I called the podcast Know Your Why. And also at the same time, this really, all of this is driven by my family. So that is my why, is to be able to have more time with my family. And it's evolved. That was my why when I started everything. It's evolved now to also include, I want to have an impact on the veterinary community. So and I've noticed this when I talk to guests and I ask them that question. There's definitely can be an evolution of your why. Some guests tell me, when they start when they started, their why was, I want to be able to pay the bills. I want enough money that I'm not scraping by every month. And so in the beginning it might be financially driven, and then they have a family, and then it's time driven, and then they have all the money and the time that they need, and now they're just trying to figure out how to sort of give back to the world. And so I think that that's the stuff that really excites me when I hear it. And so that's why the podcast is what it is. And in terms of how do you balance the time, well, you make time for the things that matter. And so you start to really, I just started to really look at my life and see, what could I cut out, how could I create more hours in the day, so get up earlier, that kind of thing. Like I just started to look at it. I watch hardly any TV. I Any TV I watch is pre-recorded because I'm not sitting there for commercials, like things like that. All of those minutes start to add up. And so, if I get up at 5 in the morning and my kids don't get up till 6:30, that's an extra hour and a half that I can work, or I can exercise, or I can do something, and I'm not missing time with them. I don't have a W-2 job. I have my own business. And so I have created that in such a way to make it extremely efficient. Whereas I'm the one who has to do the surgery, but I don't really have to do anything else. And I'm pretty good and pretty fast in the OR. So it allows me to be very efficient with the time, and I can then put everything else around it. And I have the control to say no, or not that day or whatever. And I'm not sitting in an office waiting to fill the hours in a day. So
Mhm.
it's just, to me, it was all about creating. I passed that. I passed the money, the being worried about money part, or I guess I'd say I didn't pass it, and we still have we still have bills to pay. But my priorities changed. My time became more valuable than the money. I left my W-2 job and took a fairly substantial pay cut doing that. We'll get back there. I have no doubt. The real estate will, it'll have growth. My business will grow. But it was more important to me to have control of time and be able to be there when my kids need me, my wife needs me, as much as I possibly could, and not just sort of know that I'm gone, 40 hours a week somewhere else, whereas I can control all of that now.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So there was so much in there. Let me just, I'm going to pull
Sorry, I
out a
got
couple.
rambling. Sorry.
No, no, no. That's okay. It's great. No, I wanted you. No, I just wanted you to go. So the first was, as you were talking, you talked about time and how you have mastered your time to be very efficient. Were you always like that? Or was that something that you kind of evolved into and had that moment of, wait a minute, like I need to capture my time?
A little bit of both. A
Mm.
little bit of both. When I was young, I worked for my uncle, so I guess I can thank him for this. I worked for him. He paid me. He had a mobile truck washing company. Dirty, terrible job. Also, I'm from Massachusetts. It was terrible in the winter because it was cold. I liked it in the summer, but really not the best job. I really enjoyed it because I loved working with my uncle. But aside from that, in relation to your question, he paid me by the day. And so what I figured out was, if I work harder, I can get home earlier and still make the same amount of money,
Mm.
right? And so I hate punching a time clock. I think it is the least efficient possible way to do anything. And it like another story that goes along with this. The other day, one of my technicians works for me, and she works part time because, like I said, we make it pretty efficient. We don't work 40 hours a week in surgery. But she came to me and she was like, I feel like I do a good job and I'm very efficient. And because I'm getting paid hourly, that actually hurts me. And I'd like to be paid by the case. And I was so proud. she I was so proud that like she thought that way, because that's how everybody should, like, figure out a way to maximize the value of your time. And she's like, she was all nervous about telling me, and she's like, she asked me the question. I was doing surgery. I said, "Yep." And I just kept, and she's like, "That's it." And she's like, she clearly had a speech in her mind of how she was going to convince me. And like, little did she know, I was so happy that she asked that question. Like,
Wow.
I would much rather pay someone for their abilities and production than just based on a number of hours worked. And I think that
Yeah.
should be everybody's goal in terms of their time. Because that's, if you look at it that way, value per time worked, that flips the script entirely, rather than, okay, I have to work 40 hours a week at this number of dollars per hour to afford my bills. Like, well, we'll do it in 10 hours. And then what can you do? Then you could work another 10 hours and double your pay. But a lot of people don't see it that way, and employers don't always see it that way. But
Right.
find someone who does, and the sky's the limit.
I am sure that there are some who have just listened to that and then are going to go back and rewind this particular part of the podcast because that might be so foreign to somebody listening, especially somebody who's been in W 2 jobs for all of their life or most of their life, where you sit there from 8:30 in the morning to 5 o'clock every day. And it's not, you're right, it's not very efficient. And I'm like, I could do this job in 3 hours, but I'm required to be there. So I think that, to your point, that look at the time value. How much can you get if you're doing it per case versus doing it per hour? Do you want to talk a minute about leaving your W 2? Do you want to? I know a lot of people are always interested in that topic. Do you want to talk about like what you did for your W 2 and then what brought you to the point to leave it, and then what did you jump to?
Sure. I mean, my W 2, I was a surgeon at a specialty hospital. There was a lot about it that I enjoyed. Most specifically, I trained surgery residents. So I got to pay it forward, teach them to do what I had been doing, and always been very appreciative of my mentors. So I really enjoyed that part. I enjoyed the people I worked with, but frankly, at the time, I was working a W-2 job. I had my own mobile surgery business on the side. I was doing real estate. I had the podcast. I have my family. Like, there was no more time, and I made the best use of my time at my W-2 job. A lot of people use their motivation as I hate my job. I want to leave my W-2. That's not enough. That, to me, that's not necessarily a why. That's a pain point. But guess what? When you leave that W-2, there's other hard stuff. So you need
Yeah.
something that's going to kind of keep you pushing forward and motivate you, even though you're going to leave that presumed safety and get out there. You might work harder. It's just going to be the way you want it to be. So I left the W-2 in large part because I just couldn't do it. It was just too much time. The real estate business was getting bigger, busier, that kind of thing. I don't like to do things, sort of halfway. And so I didn't feel like I was giving everything the attention that it deserved. And so made that decision. Timing of it was terrible because I left the W-2 at the end of May of 2022. And anybody listening knows what happened to interest rates right after that. The real estate market just about ground to a halt. It was challenging, a challenging 6 to 9 months for us financially. But, that's what I mean. You need to have that why, and you need to be able to believe in your vision as well. Everything I am doing is about the future and how it looks for my family, my kids when I'm gone. And I think if I look at it that way, is there something I wouldn't do for my kids? No. Like, literally nothing. And so it's kind of like, it just makes everything else small. And that's why I feel so passionate about the why, because I'm not doing it for me, I'm doing it for them. And when it was more for me, that's when I look back and I realize I probably wasted a lot of time, because it would have just been for me, and I didn't that wasn't as exciting to me.
Mm-hmm. What would you suggest to somebody who's looking for their why?
I think you first have to get really self-aware. What do you want out of life, and what's the thing what's the thing that you can't live without? What's the thing that you would give up, or what things would you give up to get there?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people a lot of people say sort of, their why is their family. And a good friend of mine and coach, he always says, you say that, but your kids don't care if you have a successful real estate business, right? They just want to play with dad. And that's 100% true. And that is actually one of my biggest struggles, is how do I make sense of the fact that the thing that drives me is also the thing that holds me back, because I don't want to give up the time with them now, but they're the reason I'm doing it all. Right. So I don't know if that makes sense, in that if I really, really wanted to increase the velocity of growth within my businesses, it would mean less time with my kids and my wife. So when I'm thinking I'm doing this all for them, I really have to keep that in mind, because right now my son wants me in there doing a puzzle with him. Like, that's what he cares about, right? That's what they want. So for someone finding their why, like, it's the thing that makes everything else small. Like I said before, it's the thing that puts perspective on the rest of life. It's the thing that makes money not matter. Like all that silly stuff, that we do, that we fill our time with. It's the thing that makes those things feel wrong, I think. And you might not it might take a minute to figure it out. And like I said, it's evolving.
Do you remember what your first why was?
Yeah. My first why was not being poor. My first why was being able to help my mom. I was raised by a single mom, me and my brother. And so this will this will age me, but I bought our family our first color TV and VCR when I was a teenager. That was
Mm.
that. So that will that will tell you, probably half the people listening don't know what a VCR is, but up until that point, we didn't have
I
those.
remember.
Yeah.
I remember
So
getting the first VCR. Yeah.
yeah. So my first why was the pain point, was getting away from what we didn't have.
Yeah.
And
How did that make you feel back then when you knew that that was your why and then you did that for your family?
I didn't know to call it a why, that's for sure. It
Mm.
felt it felt great. Obviously, I still remember it, and I just talked about
Mhm.
it. So I think it has an impact on you. And I think I've interviewed a lot of guests that have come from, low income backgrounds, and a big part of it is they remember when they were able to start helping their families. They remember
Mhm.
when they were, kind of the one that got out, that kind of thing. So I think that it's something that's always a part of me, and it's a part I don't want it to go away. Like I think it's important to remember some of that, because so you don't go back there. It's another thing that's tricky to balance, because it's like I worked very, very hard to move away from that sort of life, but also it in a lot of ways made me who I am. And so I'm not upset about it. Like I'm not, I have no like resentment or anything like that. And so then I look at, okay, well, how do I now teach my kids work ethic and, what the things that matter in life, without making them live through being poor? Like, it doesn't, you know what I mean? It's kind of,
Right.
it's just
Right.
figuring all of those balances. And I guess that's one of the things that your why will do to you. It
Mhm.
makes you think about it, get introspective, and figure out, kind of really what's most important to you. So kind of a long-winded answer to how does someone can find their why, but I think maybe what the best take home from this is to listen to how sort of passionate and rambly I got about that, and realize that's because it's so important to me.
Yeah, you're just digging down deep.
Yeah,
Like you find those pain points, and you brought up a good point too about how a lot of us, or a lot of your guests, and my guests as well, are very successful people. And when you listen to their stories, they all started dirt poor in a really bad spot where they never want to go back to again. And that was their why that propelled them
right,
forward. But you bring up a good point. How do we teach that to our kids? Because we built a life where our kids aren't in that space.
yeah,
So we have our own set of challenges where we want to teach them those work ethics. Like you said, we want to teach them to find their own whys, but again, balance and be careful that we're not handing them those things that they have to understand that we worked hard to accomplish those as well.
right.
So you bring up a good point, and it's a hard balance, that's for sure. Is there one or two things that you try and do with your kids to instill that on them so that
Yeah.
they don't, get that entitlement-ish mentality?
Yeah. My kids are still very young. My
Oh,
son's
how
four
old
and
are
a
they?
half.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my son's 4.5, my daughter's 2. So
Oh, okay.
they're
Oh,
still
you're
very young, but I will say the probably the thing that my wife and I have tried extremely hard to impart on them right from the get-go is kindness to others. So
mm,
I will say my mom, like I said, we didn't have a lot of money. There was challenges growing up, but my mom was always good to people. Like she's just I never had any reason to feel like I was better or worse than anyone else. We just that's been our main focus. Our son's probably getting to the age here where we can start to introduce some of these concepts. We try to, at the very least, it's like at Christmas time or birthdays. It's like, okay, do you want to pick something out for Ava, his sister, so that he's not, it's not always like I get. Let's let him be a part of the giving side of it. And we went, last Christmas we picked out some toys to give for Toys for Tots, and it just like doing little things like that now, and then we'll gradually sort of
mhm.
increase his level of awareness and hers as they get older.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think that's great. It's great to show that to the kids, the kindness to others. I think if all of us would practice that, it might,
Yeah.
we'd have a better world
They
out
could
there
probably
too.
teach some adults some things. I feel like I learn as much from my kids as they learn from me. So
Yeah.
they
Yeah, this is true. This is true. Is there anything that I didn't touch on that I forgot to ask that you wanted to talk about?
No, no,
No.
I
Okay.
really appreciate you having me on. I think
Oh, sure.
this has been a great conversation. Great, you actually made me talk about some pretty deep things. So that hopefully
I've heard
listeners are
that
okay
before.
with it.
Yeah, you know what? I do want to circle back around. I was listening to your one interview today with a lady. I think it was episode, oh gosh, now I can't remember, but it was recent, and her name is Anne.
Mhm.
And she talked about her story and how she started out making $5 an hour as a teacher's aide and then realized I've got to go do something else. And the really interesting part of that podcast, and she was fascinating to listen to, and I think you did a great job interviewing her as well, is that it took her a long time. It took her 20 years to build up her real estate empire. And if anything, before we go, I want to make sure we pull that out to people who are listening, that this is not, real estate is not this get rich quick. You're in it for the long haul.
Yeah, it's like I said before, you really have to believe in your vision, believe that it's
Mhm.
going to work. And it is. I mean, I think, real estate is not a get rich quick scheme, but it's a nearly guaranteed get rich scheme. Like it will happen with the given the right amount of time horizon and the right amount of work and investment into your education and you know smart investments. But yeah, no, the point about Anne is a great one, and it's so true. We live, social media is extremely popular and frankly a great tool to use, but most of the time it's a highlight reel. And so
Mhm.
see these people on there that are super popular and seems like look how successful they've been, and I just followed them on Instagram, and so you think that they just started that recently, but it's like you look back and they've been doing it for 10 years, 20 years, 40 years. It is rare that you're going to be successful at anything overnight. Like it's
Hmm.
just, I mean, again, it happens. Like there are there are people
Yeah.
that hit, right time, right place, that kind of thing, incredibly talented, and and they do manage to sort of make it quickly. Generally not in real estate. I would say that's probably more applicable to, entertainment industry or something like that. But it's market dependent, it's resource dependent, it's network dependent. There's a lot that
Hmm.
goes into it. But if you give it the right time horizon, you'll get all those things.
Yeah.
You'll go through good markets, you'll grow your network, your resources will increase. Like you'll get all that stuff eventually. You just have to stick with it. Maybe that's the one thing to answer the question of what else I would like to say. Do not quit. Just don't even let it be an option. And again, that's back to having your why. Like I'm not quitting on my kids. So there it is. Like so now I just keep going, and I'm excited to see what happens if you don't quit.
Hmm. Yeah. As you were talking, I thought of the other thing too. And there is, I remember from the book Atomic Habits, a lot of people give up before that thing actually takes off. They get to that point. They just give
Like
up
right
before
before
it's there. Yeah. Yeah. They
right
quit
before
before
it's
they,
about to take off,
yeah,
people.
right before it's about to take off. And another friend of mine in his book, the book is called The Quitter's Manifesto. And in the book, he talks about aggressive patience.
Mhm.
And I love the combination of those two words, aggressive patience, where you are aggressive where you need to be, but you're patient for the end result that you're looking for. And that's really explains real estate too. You're aggressive while you're in it, but you have to be patient to have that long reward
Yeah.
and not to quit. So, as we come to a close, I ask all of my guests a couple of questions. So, the first one is, what book would you recommend everyone should read, and why should they read it?
Who Not How. Who Not How is it's obvious
Dan
what it's about
Sullivan.
in the title.
Dan Sullivan, Ben Harding.
Yeah, yeah,
Awesome.
and I'll say that one has really been sort of life changing for me because I have throughout my life had such a DIY mentality, and so just even some of the examples they use in there, like no high achiever, no entrepreneur, high income, someone that's really trying to build something big, you shouldn't be at the grocery store unless you just love the grocery store. Like there's things that we do. You shouldn't be cleaning your own house unless you just love cleaning. Like they're just things that you can get someone else to do that frees you up to do kind of the important things. And that's really the premise of the book. But for me, I knew I had to have that shift a little bit, but the book really helped me look at it from a different perspective.
What are some examples of who's that you brought into your life so that you could do more of the other things that mattered?
Yeah, I mean, my assistant Song, she's been like the growth that we've had without her it wouldn't have happened. I would have already been lost. So she's phenomenal. We hired a nanny just to help with, kind of the things at home, free up time for me and my wife. Like that, hiring a nanny was a hard decision for us because I don't want to outsource my kids' care, but at the same time, what it allows you to do is have really focused quality time rather than like you're just constantly working and they're there, which isn't that's not you know that's not quality if you're not present with them. So I would say probably those are the two biggest examples. We've recently hired a couple of VAs to help with mainly on the social media side, but I think it's definitely something. It's still a thought process and a mindset that I'm working on for myself. This is a silly one. We're hiring a handyman to do some of the things around our house that need to be done, which like,
Is that hard for you?
yeah,
That has got to be
very
hard for
hard. Yeah,
you.
very hard for me
For
because
somebody who does, yeah, I do a lot of stuff around my house
yeah,
too. I'll pick up a power tool. I have no
yeah,
problem with doing any of that kind of stuff. So I can see it, like trying to give that task to somebody else that you can do. That's got to be a little hard.
yeah, yeah. If you could see my garage, the number of tools and things. Like I said, I've been in construction for forever, and I used to do most of it. So yeah, it's been key to let myself let those things go, and it's it's funny because there's certain places I'm very happy to do it, and then there's certain things that I'm like this handyman thing is like I almost had to not be involved and just let my wife handle it because it's like, but I could just do it, and it, but I haven't done it because I don't have time. So it's just it is an ongoing, a work in progress. I'll say.
Have to let that ego go.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. From your story, what's something that my listeners can do today that will help them change their tomorrow? What advice do you want to leave us with?
I do really think just don't quit. Right. I think it probably is a little bit cliche, but I think cliches are cliches because they're largely true if you really follow them through. But yeah, if you look at it as there is no option to quit, and I think this may be something that comes from being a surgeon. I can't decide
Mm,
I'm done in the middle of a surgery just because it gets hard, right? I can't. I that You just can't do that, right? That's not an option. And so I try to look at it the same way. Even in like there's it's easy to say this stuff here in a friendly podcast setting. There's certainly hard days, but that's why all of this stuff is so important to me. That's why my why is important.
that's
That's
why you need
why
the
not
why in
quitting.
front of you.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
that's
that's why you need the why in front of you in order
yeah.
to propel you forward when the hard days come. And as I study entrepreneurs and as I studied people who quit their W-2s and interview them, and the one common thread I've always seemed to find is that what keeps them going is whether they realize it or not, they have their own whys. Their compelling whys are bigger than anything. And that's what gets them up in the morning to go. So I would encourage anybody listening that if you don't have your why, go search for your big why and let that pull you forward. And the other thing I appreciated too was that your whys can change. So I'm glad you shared that as well.
It's a level of how you're thinking, right? But helping my mom is always there. It's still there.
Mhm.
I still want to help my mom. My kids, it'll always be there. But you start to, as your mindset evolves, you start to be able to think bigger, right? You start to be able to think mom, then family, then wait a minute, community, world. You just get into that point where you're like, and a lot of that comes from just being around other people that are kind of ahead of you in that game. My favorite talks are the ones where people are talking about what they're doing now that they've gotten to the impact stage in their life, because that's what I'm like, okay, that's now that person has shown me the roadmap to get to where I want to get. And so that's like your why evolves. It probably, the early stuff never leaves. It's
Right.
just you
Good point.
kind of mix in some bigger things.
No, good point. I love it. Absolutely love it. Jason, thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to me today. I really appreciate it. This has been, I mean, extremely valuable to me. So I hope anybody listening, it's extremely valuable to them too. So I appreciate you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much, Sue. Your questions are fantastic. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I do too. All right. Well, how can people reach out to you? Let's go there.
The best thing is just email me, jason@larkcapital.com.
Okay. All right.
Or social
Perfect.
media is fine too. Either way, but yeah, the email just directly is very, very easy.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for watching or listening to my podcast. I value your time with me because I realize you could be listening to someone else right now. And I also want you to know that I now offer coaching and consulting. So if you're thinking about creating a course but not sure how to structure it, or you have a small step you need to take to lead to a big result, but you're not sure what the in-between looks like, check out my website at www.suesaller.com for more information and to request a free consultation. Remember, life doesn't get better by chance, it gets better by choice. Take small steps and make today awesome, friends. God bless.